Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Southwark's Funding Conference. This is panel 3, and panel 3, we're going to be focusing on an eye on Southwark. What does that mean, an eye on Southwark? Well, we're going to be looking at the challenges that some of our funders face as local funders in the borough and how they address that. Now, on panel 1, if you're an attendee, we heard that Subic, the Borough of Suburb, has one of the most generous community investments from the council, including a wide range of national and local funders as well. And I'm delighted to welcome 2 of those generous funders, Sarah Fruman from the United St Saviours Trust and Foundation, and Maddie Aldridge, who's the director of Charterhouse in Suburb. We also have 2 of their recipients, but one's actually doubling up as a United St Saviours representative as well. So Will Cole and Philip White from the Step Out Mentoring. My name's David Reed, and I work for Community Southwark, and I'm also the chair of trustees for Peckham Settlement. And Peckham Settlement, we are a very, very small funder. We would have come on the bottom of the league, which John Griffiths presented from Rocket Science in panel 1, of the list of funders and how much they give per year. We give about 30,000 a year. So I think we came on the bottom of the list, but we actually weren't included in that list. So we're going to have to do something about that. Just a few things to help this session go along. If you've got questions, there's a Q&A box right at the bottom of your screen, questions and answers to the panelists. Please put them in that Q&A box, and my colleagues Alex and Saida will be monitoring that box and giving me, or I wouldn't say giving me, they're actually going to be telling us what those questions are, and then I'll direct those questions to the relevant funder or grantee. Or if you want to have a chat whilst in the session, please use the chat function. Quite simple chat function. Again, I believe it's right next to the Q&A. What we're going to do is have around about 20 minutes of just conversation with the panelists around a few really key talking points, and then we're going to open it up to the Q&A from attendees. So I'm going to shut up now and ask my panelists to introduce themselves. So we first start with Sarah.
Thanks, David. Do you want me to say a bit about United St Saviours, or just say who I am?
No, you're going to say a bit about United St Saviours, Sarah.
Okay. So I'm Sarah Thurman, United St Saviours Charity. So United St Saviours is a very ancient local trust. I don't know how that compares to Maddie. I'm not saying you're ancient, Maddie, by any stretch, but
quite old in both senses, I would say.
Since 1541, United St Saviours has been operating in Southwark. So we've got almshouses, commercial properties, and a grants programme, which has grown over the last few years. Pre-pandemic, we were awarding almost £1 million in the course of a year. We've got small grants program of under £5,000 and a large grants program anything over £5,000, and we do multi-year grants, but there are limitations to our multi-year grants because every time we make a grant, and this is probably worth knowing, that the whole grant hits our budget in that financial year, if that makes sense. So if we awarded £80,000 over 3 years, that would hit our in-year budget. So that's where we have limitations in terms of multi-year grants. But maybe I can take any questions about that later. But during the pandemic, we ran the Community Response Fund, the Southwark Community Response Fund, and I'm sure some of you who are in the audience today would have been recipients of that. And we are now back to our business as usual grant making, and we will be open for small and large grants again in April. I think that's probably all I need to say.
Thank you ever so much, Sarah. 1541, did you say, Sarah?
1541, but I haven't been here that long.
Well, Sarah, if you had been, you'd weathered very, very well.
Thanks, David.
Can we have Maddie? Yes, Maddie, could you just introduce yourself and then maybe say a little bit about Charterhouse in Suburb?
Thanks, David. My name's Maddie Aldridge, and I work for a much smaller funder in the borough called Charterhouse in Southwark, which does have very ancient roots like United St Saviours, although we have only been in the borough, or the borough part of Southwark, for about 150 years. And only up until 10 years ago, we were an operational charity. Various reasons, we became a funder and sold the property they owned and put it into a fund to be able to grant throughout the year. We have probably about up to 130,000 at the moment we grant annually, with grants that can be anything from £1,000 up to 10,000, but on average they come in at about 6 or 7, and more likely to be that sort of level at the moment with the demand of applications that we have. So we'd rather give more grants than larger grants, which is what we used to do. We used to do far fewer. However, it's changed in the coming up to 5 years since I've been with Charterhouse in Southwark, in that I was trying to find charities, and I used to ask Sarah, who should I be funding, right at the beginning of my job. But now it's the applications are coming in thick and fast. I'm sure Sarah would agree. It's probably fourfold than in the last 2 years in any case. So it's much more difficult to get funding. That's bleeding obvious really, but it's making it much more difficult because all the applications are pretty good. That's what I would say. For me anyway, the applications, once they get to us, having met them and understanding what they're doing, then they pretty are good enough to be awarded. It's a case of we don't have enough money. So that's a sad end to what I'm saying, but we are out there and we're always open to looking at organisations that work with young people and children. So if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you ever so much, Maddie, for that introduction to Charterhouse in Suburb. It's really interesting to know that you're getting lots of applications and they're of good quality. So that makes your task even more difficult to decide who you're going to give money to, Maddie. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in our conversations as we go through the panel. Now, let's go to our grantees. Philip White, Step Out Mentoring. Philip, quick introduction about yourself, Step Out Mentoring, and also, Philip, that you're a grantee. You received a grant from the Charterhouse in Sabbath.
Yes, thanks, David. Yeah, we were very privileged and blessed to get a grant from Charterhouse, which has enabled us to kind of carry out our work this year. What we do, so we are a mentoring organisation. We are really about empowering the local community by training local members of the community up to be youth mentors. And then what we do is we match them up to young people who are referred into our programme, and they then meet them on a weekly basis for about 2 hours a week to really encourage the young people out and about to get more active, but also just to create a safe space where they can start to talk about some of the challenges that young people are facing at the moment in this sort of very difficult time for young people at the moment, with transition out of lockdown and all that's happening. So we currently support about 25 young people in Southwark. That means 25 people are meeting with a local member of the community once a week for about 2 hours a week. And then around that, we also carry out various trips and residentials just to kind of help build community and friendships for these young people.
Thank you ever so much, Philip, for that really interesting introduction. And we'll hear lots more from you later on. So Will Cole, I've left you last, Will, because I've been trying to think in my head, how am I going to introduce you? So Will used to be used to be somebody who ran a charity or involved in a charity that was funded by the United St Saviours. And guess what, everyone? He's now a member of staff of the United St Saviours Trust. How did that happen, Sarah? And did you pay a transfer fee? That's what I want to know. Anyway, Will, Will, can you introduce yourself? Maybe say a little bit more about the charity that you're involved in as a grant applicant, and a bit about your work now at United St Saviours.
Thanks, David. I think that transfer fee is still pending. That's coming through. So my current role, I'm the program director for One Southwark, currently being hosted by United St Saviours. It's a new program that we've launched in the new year, supporting 16 to 25-year-olds to kind of progress. We'll get into more details, but if people want to find out more, please feel free to reach out. My previous life was as head of program development for Power 2, which is a national charity that works with young people who are at risk of exclusion or not meeting their academic potential. And essentially the program that we went to United St Saviours for funding for, which is still being funded, was the flagship Teens and Toddlers program, which is an 18-week mentoring program that pairs up young people with toddlers and allows them to basically build up their interpersonal skills. So myself and Louise, who was our director of income and engagement at the time, we went to meet Sarah about 2 or 3 years ago to have what was now obviously a fruitful meeting. And yeah, that kind of set the seeds of what would happen a few years later when I snuck out the back door.
Thank you very much, Will, for the introduction. And yeah, it's quite clear how that journey has been made from you as a grant recipient now as somebody who's actually giving out grants. So Subic, what do we know about Subic? So Subic is one of the most deprived local authorities in the UK. I think the last time that I looked all of this up, it was in the top 50. So that actually shows you how much of a challenge it will be for people who are giving funding to particular charities or community groups, how difficult it is to really work out what is the best way in which you can support people who are in that poverty and deprivation area. Also, 50% of the population in Sabbath are from BME communities. So that also adds to the complications, if you like, and the challenge of being able to support particular communities who traditionally have seen inequalities being maybe the order of the day for them. We heard in panel 1 how some BME-led organisations were frustrated about the whole sort of system in which they were able to access grants from Sabbath Council, and maybe that frustration also has gone over to the trusts and foundations as well, because they didn't understand the work that we were doing, and they were more on the processes rather than the actual work that we could do. Processes like, you know, have you got good governance in place, or your financial management and planning, how well are you doing on that, rather than recognizing the great work that these organizations were doing. So I want to start off with the first talking point. What do you see as the main issues facing the London Borough of Suburb now? What do you think are the main issues facing the London Borough of Suburb now? I'm going to go over to Maddie.
Sure. Well, within respect of what I have been working with young people and children and charities, and from sort of my limited knowledge, or my knowledge of when I was working as a social worker, albeit it wasn't in Southwark, it was mainly in Lambeth, I would say there's not enough for the children or young people to get stuck into. And I think it starts at 4, 3 or 4. They're not, led into a life after school or on the weekend and programs, which leads to, I don't know, mental health issues, obesity, all the other things, loneliness, all those things that can create toxic issues and problems that we've got possibly in Southwark at the moment. That's just one of the areas that I've been thinking about in how I'm doing my work and where we will be going with funding. I think it's an educational problem. Actually, I think it starts there. The schools are not able to provide enough for the children to start them off on that road. And I don't think that the parks and the spaces, we've got brilliant parks and spaces in Southwark, and better than most of the boroughs, and I just still don't think they're being utilised properly. So that's what I feel is a big issue. And I think if we could solve that problem as to what we should be doing with our young children, that will be fed through to teenagers and a lifestyle beyond, of being in sport, being in music, being in a creative area, and having other interests other than school and a television set outside of school, simply put.
Okay, thanks very much, Maddie. So you feel that more can be done, and especially around that transition from children to young people, how we can use creative spaces much better, open spaces much better, more creatively. And these are the things that you're keen to do something about. I'm going to come back to you on that, Maddie. Sarah, can we go over to Sarah and Will? I think we can ask both of you to tackle that question. What are the main issues facing Subic at the moment?
I'll rattle through. I mean, our approach at United St Saviours, we have broader themes, probably because we've got more money than Maddie. So we are about community building and about older people and tackling inequalities. So I'm going to just rattle through some of the big issues I think Southwark's facing at the moment, which some of them are not Southwark specific, they're national. So I think the biggest thing we've got is inequality. You said it's a deprived borough, but it's also an unequal borough because you've got wealth and you've got poverty, rising cost of living, fuel prices, financial stress, jobs not paying. The unemployment is low, but jobs are not paying enough. Housing, we know it's a massive problem here. Lack of a safety net, what we saw during the pandemic, which was huge numbers of people, and I know we've got Queen in the audience here, and I got to know Queen during the pandemic. Large numbers of people, particularly from the new immigrant communities, who don't have a safety net, and they were going hungry. And there was some extraordinary work happening to support them. So new immigrants, no recourse to public funds. I think the other thing is we've got public sector stress. I think we're going to have shortages and cuts in terms of public services. And in terms of the voluntary sector, I mean, those of you in the audience will know this as much more than me. Fundraising challenges, big time at the moment. Funders are not doing what they were doing pre-pandemic. They're becoming more targeted. Some of them have not got their programs back to business as usual, and it's much more difficult to get funding, and the demand is high. As Maddie said earlier, we got 4 times the number of applications for our last grants program this end of last year than we normally get. And I think that's going to get worse in 2022.
Sarah, I'm going to stop you there.
I'll finish.
Okay, brilliant. Good, great timing. Will, anything to add to what Sarah?
I think Sarah's covered up most of it, but I think if I'm looking at it from a young person's perspective, it's just access. There's a lack of access to kind of realistic opportunities. Kind of those pathways are not real. It's like the young people live within this borough. They're surrounded by so many of these fantastic opportunities, buildings, organizations, but there's not a direct pathway to them. So they almost live within these communities and they're surrounded by opulence and what they could have, but they don't know who to talk to. They don't know who to reach out to. It's not realistic. It's almost they're supposed to look at it, exist within this, but it's unattainable. So it's providing that and making it realistic. And then from a charitable perspective, I think it's piggybacking on what Sarah and Maddie said, we're providing realistic resources because you're almost supposed to exist on a shoestring, but people still want these massive outcomes. And it's just about looking into that and building up that kind of wealth of resources for everyone, so those resources are out there and young people can benefit from it and so forth. It's just about being realistic in every possible way.
Thanks very much, Will. Quickly over to Phil. So Phil, I know that your charity specifically deals with young people and mentoring. What are the big issues for young people and mentoring for you?
Yep. So I think one of the main things we're noticing is the real increase in isolation and loneliness for young people at the moment. And I think it kind of comes down to what we feel is really community and the sort of breakdown of community. And this isn't just Southwark, this is kind of across the board, but we really see there's a lack of people that have young people in mind in their neighborhoods. So young people they don't know anyone on their street. They don't know many people in their block at the moment. And there's no not many trusted adults around their life. And that's the sort of real, those are the members of the community that are going to keep kind of young people accountable, keep them safe. It's about kind of contextual safeguarding as well, which we really sort of advocate for, which is where everyone has a role to keep these young people safe. So I think that's something we've really noticed, especially in this last sort of year, is that kind of people have gone a little bit insular. They're forgetting that there's young people on their doorsteps that really need support. And in terms of what we're sort of doing about it, that's one of our sort of models, is we want to, one by one sort of train up local members of the community to look out for those young people. And that's a kind of sustainable sort of thing that can carry on into the years coming up as these young people grow into adults.
Thank you ever so much, Phil. So young people disconnected from the rest of the community, but you're doing something about it, sort of training up local people, and that's your model, to work with young people. That leads us nicely on to my sort of next point, but which is a sub point of that question. Maddie, can you tell us one thing that Charterhouse in Subic is doing to address some of the problems that you mentioned earlier on?
I think we have probably, for the last 2 years, we have really tried to direct our funding towards programs that are getting children out of their houses, not necessarily mentoring, although Step Out came in at our last round, which is why we're sort of broadening out. But we definitely felt as a board of trustees that we were wanting to encourage or help the organisations that were paying for holiday programs, after school programs, which had activities in them outside, and getting the children, I suppose, or young people back into the routine of spending time playing football, dance, all those sorts of things. So that's where we chose to direct funding. They took priority, I suppose, which wasn't very difficult for us because we fund youth programs and things like that often have those within them. So that's where we are. We're open to everything, but that's where we decided we would focus for about 18 months once we opened our funding again after we had a short break when we lost our own funding, but that's where we decided we'd take it.
Thank you ever so much, Maddie, for that response. Sarah, can I go over to you and Will? One thing, Sarah, you gave us a long list of some of the main issues. Some of them, like you said, they were national. Jobs not paying, unemployment, housing issues. Voluntary sector have got problems with staying alive, and the sort of inequity and inequalities which really sort of exists. One thing that the United St Saviours is actually doing to address some of those issues that you gave us, Sarah and Will.
I'll do a short one, then Will can follow. So one of the things that we're doing at the moment, we have pulled together a ring-fenced fund specifically for Black and minority ethnic groups, because we recognise that they have historically struggled, and you hinted at this earlier, David, they have struggled to get funding, and so many people who are working with charities in Southwark are not necessarily, the charities and the organisations supporting them are not necessarily representative of those groups. So we've got a dedicated fund now for Black minority ethnic groups, and I'm really excited about that, and we're learning a lot about how to fund better to reach such groups.
That's really excellent news for the Black and minority ethnic-led community. How much is the ring fence funds, Sarah? Can you just give us some more information about that very quickly?
In this financial year that we're about to finish, we had 45,000 pounds, and we haven't decided next year.
Okay. Will, can we go over to you?
Thanks, David. So again, I'm just tackling it from the young people's perspective. So introducing the new One Southwark program, which is supporting a cohort of 20 young people this year, aged 16 to 25. We're providing each young person with a personal support grant of up to £3,000. We're connecting them to kind of meaningful resources and opportunities within the borough, and simultaneously working with them to kind of identify barriers to progression for young people in general. And we'll be taking that to champion it and move out and speak to organizations, businesses, basically local stakeholders about kind of changing their behaviors and practices to support young people in general. I think for us, we're looking at it from a systems change perspective. If we can tackle this, if we can change the system by proxy, it will benefit more young people. So I think that's what we're pushing towards, and that's the kind of meaningful change we're going after. Just another quick plug, places are still open for application until March 27th. I'll put my email in the chat. If you need to speak to me, please get in touch. Shameless plug, but I'm proud of it because we want to reach out and help young people.
I allow you one plug, Will, but that's not going to encourage everyone else to be doing plugs.
Thanks, David.
Okay, look, guys, thank you ever so much. So let's move on to the next talking point. And in a way, this is kind of the opposite to what we've been speaking about. I want you guys to tell me, what are the strengths of Suburb? So we've heard how difficult lives are for people in Suburb. You've talked about how you as grant givers are trying to deal with some of those difficult situations that people face in the borough of Sabbath. Phil's told us about issues that young people are, they're isolated. They just cannot, or people forget about them, so they're not connected to their own neighborhoods. So tell us, what do you think is really strong about Sabbath? What are we doing well in the borough? What are people thriving on? Let's go to Sarah. Sarah.
An amazing voluntary and community sector. Wherever I've worked, I've come across such amazing, diverse, strong, and many organisations, which is brilliant.
Okay, thank you. Voluntary and community sector, yes. I think I said there was about 600 and odd registered charities, but they're actually even more, if you like, in terms of not-for-profits, because a lot of not-for-profits are not registered charities. So there you go.
No,
Maddie.
I think it's one of the best in Southwark. I mean, I think people talk about Southwark being extraordinary, and I think during the pandemic, it really shone Southwark. It really came out way above the other boroughs and what they were providing, and the response was extraordinary. And how you guys got your funding together as a group so quickly and up and running, it just shows you what can be done. And I would say that, I mean, that's a great thing to say about a borough. And I have lived here, I don't know, for nearly 30 years, I suppose, and having come from a different country too. And I'm constantly amazed at what goes on at community level in this place when you have so many different types of people living in it. It's a constant reminder working and living within it, and having children at schools and in the area, you get to be able to see what really does happen at that grassroots level. So, and I would also, it's a very beautiful borough. I mean, we are incredibly lucky with the parks that we have. I just don't think there are boroughs like it. And Burgess Park is a perfect example of how they have turned that one completely around. It was sort of a dead space when I first arrived in Southwark, and look at it now. It's hundreds of people using it every day. So they're great strengths, and they are community building spaces, I would say.
Thanks very much, Maddie, for your very descriptive and picturesque response. Will, would you agree the voluntary and community sector in Southwark is vibrant, It's thriving, and it does amazing work with almost very little sometimes. Would you agree with that comment, Will?
Yeah, definitely agree. There's an appetite for people to help and support, and we've just found out. You know, I've lived in Southwark most of my life, kind of growing up on the Rockingham estate, and just that aspect of people willing to help and reaching out, I think played a big impact on me. And even in my career now, just being able to network with different people and kind of, you know, come out of working in silos and operate and kind of collaborate with other people. That appetite is always there. I'm always shocked about when you reach out to someone and they're just like, yep, let's go, we can do it, we can do this, we can do that. It's still amazing, and I think that spirit still exists within this borough.
Thank you, Will. So Phil, we've heard how wonderfully beautiful Southwark is as a borough. We've also heard that, you know, community action, you know, is really a big thing. That's what matters to a lot of people here in the borough, and it's played out through all of the community groups and organisations that exist in Sabbath. So Phil, does that mean your recruiting of volunteers for your mentoring project should be quite simple then?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, we're always amazed at the amount of volunteers that come through and get in touch with us and want to get involved. I think especially since some of the lockdowns are finished, there's been a constant sort of stream of people wanting to give back to the community, and it's a really promising. I think it's a point in sort of time when suddenly people are realizing they want to reconnect with community, and how important it is. Maybe, you know, having been at home for a good year has sort of knocked people into a little bit of sense that actually community matters more than it did before. So yeah, we're seeing Southwark has been amazing, kind of providing us mentors. It's coming up to sort of 50 volunteers that we're sort of training up, and we've only been operating for about a year and a half. So every single person that contacts us is always brings a smile to our face, because it's another young person that potentially we can sort of get supported. So
yeah, thank you very much, Phil. So you've got high hopes that the community will respond to your calls for people to help with your mentoring project with young people. That's really great. That's really great to hear. Our next talking point: funding applications. How do you guys decide who to fund? Maddie, in your introduction, you said you were getting lots of applications, good quality applications.
Yeah.
What are the key things that you look for as a funder to separate those good applications to then decide that this is the application that we're going to fund?
Well,
reveal all, please, Maddie.
Sorry.
Reveal all.
I was going to bring suggested Phil join us today to talk about that, because his application was really good and he did exactly what we asked of him last year when we said we're not in a position, we weren't really looking for mentoring organisations to fund this year, but come back to us, and he did in the right time, and it really helped us having a very clear, it's very easy if the organisation is good and the application is clear. I would say, how would you put this? Well, I'll bring you in later on, actually, Phil, to tell you, you discuss how it was for you. But you actually made it very clear. You said, this is how we do it. So the strategy was there straight away in a very simple sort of format. When my applications get read by all of my trustees, it's not just me. I just take the ones that I think are nearing the end. So they have to be really clear and not long. We don't need all the Southwark statistics. We know all of those, but we do need to have a very clear idea so they don't get muddled with all the other applications. So good strategy, and it's clear that we can, as long as a charity is prepared to have a sort of meaningful and good, strong relationship with us or partnership with us. We don't ask very much of you, but we do expect you to join us as a partner, I suppose, and putting the program together, whether it's a multi-year or whether it's a year. And I suppose a good application will come by demonstrating that they've got the skills to run the project, I suppose, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be really, really simple, but just as long as they have the experience to take on that work. We're a small charity. We do take some chances, but we can't just take chances all the time. So it's a little bit on gut, and it's a little bit on meeting the project and having an invitation to come and see something. So engagement is brilliant. When that works, it tends to get closer to the end game, if that makes sense. Sorry, it's a bit all over the place, but that's how it is for us. We're a smaller organisation, so it's easier for us, though, I will say that.
Thanks very much, Maddie. We're going to come back about building relationships with funders a little bit later, but Phil knew that he had a great application when he submitted it to you, Maddie. He knew he had a fantastic application.
It doesn't have to have, it doesn't have to have good spelling and stuff like that. That's not what we're interested in. We're sort of interested in tell us what it does on the tin, sort of thing. Okay,
brilliant. So you mentioned it. I picked out two of the things that you said were really important to Charterhouse in Suburb. Clear. Can you give us an example of what you mean by clear and demonstrating that they have the skills? One example of both, please. So everybody who's listening in and is interested in applying to Charterhouse in Suburb, you've just given them a hot tip. We want to know what that
it's not pretty basic. On the application form, you know, you go through all the name and address and everything, who you are, and then we say, what do you do? And that's where we always get stuck with people. It's like, what do? You have to be able to say it in one sentence, one long sentence if you like, but one. Tell us exactly what you do. So that's what I would say start off with. Don't get carried away with language that's overused. That's in this sector, I think. That's probably what I would say. Just be very clear. We run our youth program in Consort Road in Peckham, and we look to have a program that will work with children between 6 and 10. That's where you start. Basically say that, and then we take it from there. Sometimes these things get lost, and I can read an application and go, I actually have no idea. We're probably doing brilliant things, but I have no idea what they really do. And then I will often say, so I think I said this to Phil, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? How does your day begin? Tell me what you are doing and what one of your mentors are doing. And that will start the story, I think, build the story.
So thanks very much, Maddie, for that. And just one quick example, demonstrating their skills. What would you be looking for?
Ask us to come down to see something. We'll be there in a shop. One of my trustees or myself will come and see a program in action. That's part of the process for us. It's the easiest way to showcase, or send us a short video of if you can, you know, if you're allowed to, of one of the programs that you do. That's a really effective way for my trustees. I send them all to that. I ask them sometimes if they've got any footage that we can show them exactly what they do, and that's easy with the phone.
So 2 hot tips from Maddie, Charterhouse in Sabbath. Be clear from the beginning.
One sentence. That's it.
One sentence. Could be a long sentence, one sentence. And skills. Invite them down. They're quite happy to come down and visit your projects. Or if you can't send them a video if permissible. Phil, let's go over to you. So you put in a brilliant application. You know, so what was your sort of strategy behind the application? Why was it so brilliant?
Yeah, I think it kind of started with, we just reached out to Maddie at Charterhouse maybe a year earlier just to find out and ask. So it was already starting to build that relationship just by sending that sort of personal message out. And, you know, at the time, it wasn't the right time for us to apply, but Maddie kind of gave us advice about to come back, you know, in the following year. And then following that up, so it kind of shows that you're interested and you're engaged, and you're, you know, a project that will keep being engaged as they fund you. So I think that was something that we found really helpful. And then it was, yeah, amazing just to, when funders come and visit your project and find out what you actually do, that's always a really good sign, because you can get so much more of a sense of what you actually do in person rather than on a form. So we always kind of jump at the chance of meeting any funders where possible, and like Maddie said, inviting them to any events that we do is always a really good plus as well. So yeah.
I was just going to say, David, sorry, you'd be amazed how many people that I'll say, it's not this round, is you're too late for this round, or you don't fit at the moment because of what we're doing, but come back, I won't hear from them again. It's amazing how many people do not reply, which is disappointing, because that's their reach outs, that's their time where they get to say, great, I'll be back in touch in 6 months' time. And sometimes, and I have done this week, saying, actually, we haven't got the capacity for your organisation at the moment. We just can't do it. But I just say, keep coming back to us. They go on a list, and if we do find capacity, we would probably go and have a look to see. It doesn't happen at the moment, I can tell you, but they certainly go on a list, and we like to share. I'm sure Sarah will tell you this. If it doesn't fit with us, I'll say, try these ones, and give them a link to these other funders, because we want you all to have funding. Basically, it's not a case of it's our money and we're giving it away. We would love to fund everybody if we could. Sorry to butt in, but that's.
Yeah, I think that was really an important point. And what you said about an organisation making a first contact, you then reply, and then you don't hear anything from them. How are you expected to build a relationship with your funder?
Yeah. So that's my advice. Keep in touch. Don't be disappointed. Don't be too disappointed if we say it's not good for now. There could be a time, or someone might reach out later on saying, I heard you're looking for funding. So, and that does happen.
So Phil, the message that you sent to Charterhouse in Southwark, was that something that was already kind of pre-worked out, that might be the best way for you to start engaging with Charterhouse, or was it just something you just sort of woke up one morning, let me just send a message and see what happens? What inspired you to do that?
So I think one of the first things was actually being involved with what Community Southwark do, and being on top of their sort of newsletters and looking at their funding sort of options they have. So it's kind of keeping a constant eye on what's coming out, and then just taking the time to kind of read what each funder does, and try and get your project to match up with what the funders are kind of offering. Like, it's very easy for you to be steered by what funders are offering, but then often you'll find your project going off-piste and you end up changing your project to fit into what funders actually want. So I think it's really key that you keep to your vision, and then you find funders that will fit to that vision, because that's going to produce the best applications, and the really true and honest applications. So yeah, that would be my sort of advice.
Thanks very much, Phil. And please, everyone, we didn't set Phil up to say that Community Southwark was the you need to go to Community Southwark to check out all of our latest news and information and opportunities for you to apply for funding. But Phil's raised a really, really good point, because we do have, as up to date as we can, anything that comes our way, we put it on our website. We've got a fantastic communications team. Our BCS support team are great. So anything that comes our way, we kind of collate it together and get it out as quickly as possible. So it's really important that you visit our website regularly. We send out regular e-bulletins, funding e-bulletin, keeping up with Sabbath. It's all packed with so much information, not only about funding, but about what's happening in the borough. So please, 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 Phil said it, and he's been successful, and one of the reasons that inspired him was the information that he received from us. And he talks about making sure that you read the criteria of the funder, and don't fit it into something that you're not wanting to do, because that's one of the big problems with organizations. They're desperate for funding, and they read the criteria, and maybe we can twist what we are saying that we do into something that we're actually not doing. And that's really a big thing. Stick to your vision. Sarah and Will, I'm going to go over to you. Same question. Sarah, you're a much bigger organisation than Maddie's organisation. So, and you said earlier on that you had to close your application programs at one stage. So look, Sarah, how do you decide on the hundreds of applications that you receive? What are the key things that stand out for you as United St Saviours?
So the first thing is we look for applications that fit our priorities. That's back to what was said earlier. Look at what our priorities are first. Don't just apply randomly. And then I would just echo what Maddie says, is tell a clear story. Just tell your story. And in that, it's that first thing that you read. It's like looking at a job application, isn't it? The first thing you see is like, if that says very clearly what you do or who you are, then that's going to grab our attention. And what I would say is get someone to read it first. So get a stranger to read what you're going to send to us first, like an elevator pitch, if you like, and make sure it makes sense to somebody you don't know before you send it in to us. But the other thing, because I know we're running out of time, I'd say call us, because if you've got an idea or you've got a really strong story, but you don't write brilliantly, just call us. We say to everybody who's making an application, pick up the phone.
So do we.
Yeah. Can help you. And I think it's so important, particularly as a place-based funder. As Maddie said earlier, it's about a relationship. So call us and we can even help you fill out the application if we think you've got a really good idea, but you're not that skilled at filling out applications. So that I'll leave it at that, and I'll just hand over to Will, because he'll
very quickly, Will, because
see how we do it.
Yeah, it's just to add to what Sarah said in terms of getting in touch. Just reach out, place-based funding, make those local connections, whether it's a phone call or popping in, build the relationship, and you don't know how far it will take you. But that's the whole point. Take advantage of someone being nearby and build that, because the moment might not be this one, but there's other rounds of funding that could be coming up, and you've put your hat in the ring, and they could just remember you just from the fact that you've made initial contact and taken that step.
Thanks very much, Will. Thanks very much, Sarah. We are running out of time, and that's my fault, so I'm holding up my hand. But just to quickly summarise, from United St Saviours, read their criteria, please. Hot tip. Make sure your story is clear. And I've made a note of this, Sarah. We will even help you to fill out your application. I've made a note of that, Sarah. It's going to go onto our Community Southwark website tomorrow. Headline news. Look, it's question and answer time. Thank you ever so much for really an informative and lively discussion around those talking points. We've got around about 12 minutes for questions and answers. So Alex, can you provide us with the first question?
Sure. I think there's slight miscommunication there. We've actually only got about 2 minutes, but luckily there only are a couple of questions in, so that's okay. We've got one here about, they're quite specific, so bear with me. It's about the idea of long-term funding and continuity. So for the funders with Madeline and Sarah, let's know, how do you feel that your organisations can support groups to continue their work rather than have short projects that just end and it's difficult to then kind of continue the work they do?
Do you want to take that first?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, we will do multi-year grants wherever we can. And we would prefer to give multi-year grants rather than one-year grants. Having said that, we've just awarded or about to award quite a few one-year grants because we haven't got enough money to do multi-year grants. But in normal ways, we would prefer multi-year.
And is there a particular way that an organisation can make a case for multi-year funding? Or is that just a case of telling the story in the most effective way?
Yep. And build the relationship. What we probably wouldn't do with the first, we tend to go for multi-year grants to an organisation we've already got a relationship with. So start small. And often a good way with the United St Saviours is come in with a request for a small grant. We'll build up the relationship, and then you can move on to a larger grant and a multi-year grant.
And that's exactly the same for us. We probably wouldn't do a multi-year grant first off if we don't know you, but actually it's a good point, that is that I will look at who Sarah's funding, and I will look at other funders to see if they're funding. So if they've been around the block for a bit and they're just needing extra to build on, we would probably consider a multi-year group if they are long-standing organisations. Probably not on a small startup, I think, just to give them, but we would be there for support. So we may not be able to give them financial support, but we would definitely give them support in other aspects if we can, if there is the capacity. So we're the same, you know, it's sort of easier for us, I would say, Sarah, if we have a multi-year grant, because it's less in the long term if we have quite a few multi-year. So and also we know it helps with the projection of the program. It can only really be sustainable if it's got its second year. So yes, ideally we would like 2 or 3 years to come through if possible.
Great. And I get the feeling a lot of that will carry through both, you know, you are representing kind of smaller local funders, but when we speak to City Bridge Trust in our final session this afternoon, I'm sure they were saying that's much the same thing. Is if you can start small, the project, build a relationship, then you're in a much better place for that long-term funding. And one final question, which I know we comes up all the time when we talk about funding, is about core or unrestricted funding. This is obviously a big issue for a lot of groups. Again, what are your priorities as funders, and how can an organisation help make the case for that core funding that's not project-based?
We're too small to worry too much about that. Actually, that's what I would say. We're open to it. Happens in that discussion stage, I suppose. And I would say, what would you need the funding for? And they say, we just need funding just to keep the place open. Then that's what I would go for. Go for what you feel is in your gut, actually. Go for what you really need most from us. If we think we're going to be a big chunk of your whole programme, then go for core funding. If you know that you want to fund 30 children to go on a trip for a week somewhere, then say that. I mean, that's how I would start. And we can sort of mould it. And if I'd say that's going to be too much for us, we won't have the funding for that. Let's look somewhere else where you might be able to get that more easily, and we could do that. It starts with a discussion. I think that's probably, but we are a smaller organisation and probably are able to do that more so than, you know, we don't have any huge restrictions.
Yeah, and we're doing core and unrestricted now. So this round that we're finalising at the moment, around 50% is unrestricted, because we think that's the best way to support organisations when the funding environment is quite difficult, because then they can do what they want to.
I would have to say that most funders, I think, if there's a problem with the programme and it's having to stop for whatever reason, a pandemic, come back to us, discuss what happens, and we will shift as well. I think that's another piece. People are frightened that they might not get their funding again. Things happen and people move on. So there are situations where, you know, it just can't continue. And the best thing is to come back to us and we can make a plan with you, whether it's putting it on hold the next bit or hang on for the following year. So that's what I would say. Keep in contact with your funder is probably the best advice with that.
Alex, I'm really conscious that we're 3 minutes over time, and that is my fault. I'm putting my hands up to that. I think I saw a message that there is one more question. Have we got time to take that question?
Yeah, it's a very specific question. It's just for Maddie. You mentioned a project in Consort Road.
Oh, that was just a made-up one. Sorry, Alex. That was just made up. I couldn't think of where all our projects were at the time. Yeah, no, I'm sure there is one in Consort Road. There's probably 5, actually, but...
Sure, that's fine. David, would you like to round up, and we'll...
I think I will, Alex. Look, it's been a really informative, insightful and lively conversation. I got carried away. I thought we finished at 1 o'clock, but you know, it was such so absorbing that, you know, I've lost track of my notes. So apologies for that. But I reckon that we've really covered in a very, very short time some really pertinent talking points. We spoke about the sort of major issues from a funder's perspective. In Suburb, we looked very deeply into that. We looked at some of the strengths of Suburb: active, voluntary and community sector, people willing to either get stuck in as a volunteer or run their own organizations or community groups. Isn't that fantastic? That question that every grantee wants to ask, funding application, what is the key tips to making their funding applications better with the funders? And you gave us some real hot tips. I'm going to finish off now because the time is flying. But just to say thank you, Sarah from United St Saviours, thank you, Maddie from Charterhouse in Suburb, and Will from United St Saviours, who's also doubling up as a grantee as well. Phil from Step Out Mentoring, please, good luck with all of your recruiting of local volunteers for those young people. We want to make sure that young people feel part of their neighbourhoods, and as that, you know, everybody needs to sort of help with that. I'm going to say a very good afternoon to everybody and a goodbye to everybody. We have panel 4 coming back. Apologies again for overrunning. Thank you very much. And thank you all our panelists.
Thanks everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
Just a reminder that we'd great to find your feedback on the panel. So if you can see a poll on your screen at the moment, do let us know. We'll be returning at 1:30 for the final session of the day. Do grab a chance to get outside, grab some lunch, and we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.